So welcome to installment number 2 of our class on pranic principles as related to meditation. Uh, Previously, we discussed how just the notion of prana itself is a foreign concept in many ways, right? It's not a it's not a topic that we typically discuss. Um, More so in yoga circles than anywhere do we talk about prana. And it may even be viewed with some skepticism. And that from there, we discussed how we can kind of broaden our view and how many yoga practices are constructed around these ideals of prana, or how to approach prana or relate to prana in different ways that we can do that through the asana, breathing, and so forth. And today I want to turn our attention to a very practical discussion about how prana relates to our mental state. And we begin by emphasizing that our mental state is really the crux of our life experience. And by mental state, from the yogic perspective, they roll thoughts and emotions into, they don't tease those apart so much. It's the basic word for both of those things, thoughts and emotions, is chitta. And chitta essentially means mind. So within the mind, there's both thoughts and emotions. And emotion, essentially a very visceral thought or a kinesthetic thought. They both have their origin in the similar place in the chitta. And thoughts and emotions, or chitta, is our dominant experience of life, right? How we know ourselves, how we know our environment, how we interpret ourselves, how we interpret our environment. All of that is held or contained within our particular mental constructs. And regardless, or rather, certainly the outer environment influences our mind. You know, I feel very grateful to be living in the home that I do, and as opposed to on the street. That would have a different imprint or influence on my mind. So our environment does influence our thoughts, but ultimately the experience of our environment or the experience of ourselves is something that's contained inside of ourselves, within the chitta. In fact, people can experience the same environment, and they do, experience the same environment or the same set of circumstances and come to two radically different interpretations as to why it's significant, how they think and feel about it. One person could lose a job, and for them, it's the launch point to a new destiny and a great new opportunity. And for someone else, it's, you know, solace and despair and depression. Same event, just interpreted in totally different ways. And they're visceral, not only like intellectually interpreted, but their visceral thoughts and emotions are worlds apart as well. And that experience of thoughts and emotions is the crux of our sort of existence in a way, right? Our view interprets so much of our life experience. So in short, our mental state's a pretty big deal, right? Ultimately, it's more central than say our environment. And so it's important then to just again from yoga perspective to develop positive traits, qualities, tendencies, right? To view things more positively as opposed to negatively. And this is both for our own benefit and enrichment, as well as our relationship to the outer world, that we can be of more, agency or good or support, or cultivate virtues of love and compassion, both inside and outside. And no, it's not so easy to do that all the time, is it? Right. It's easy, there's times we can slide into anxiety or depression or resentment or despair, or any number of emotions that are present in the human experience that aren't so wholesome, aren't so pleasant, um, that drag us down. The center of our life experience sinks, or it lifts up, right? And I think we'd all agree. Uh, and Patanjali says the same thing. He says that there's thoughts that are conducive to our spiritual growth, and there are those thoughts that aren't. Klishta. And so the import in yoga is to develop positive thought constructs. And even those positive ones will eventually bump into some sense of limitation. Like, we'll discover some degree of selfishness and whatever manner of compassion we're trying to cultivate, and then it keeps growing and evolving like that. So the version of you, if you persist and continue practicing yoga for the next 5 years, 5 years from now, you'll be able to look back at your current version of you and your understanding and your mind, and degree of selfishness or not, and have a different perspective, hopefully a more elevated one. So and that's what the practices are intended to do, to develop more positivity, which is variant and subjective over time. And the medium by which this is done is both through the mind. So you might say meditative practice, or asana has some effect as well. That's one limb or branch of how yoga approaches this. Equally, particularly in Hatha Yoga, draw upon the force of prana. And again, briefly, prana is a ubiquitous life force, and is readily accessed or present through the breath. One of the most direct ways that we can relate to this idea of life force is through the manner in which we breathe, through food and sunlight or other examples. As it turns out, the manner in which that prana and chitta the mind, and prana the life force, move in tandem with one another. It said they're like two fish. So where one goes, the other goes. They're in this immutable relation, like two sides of the same coin. How we think is mapped out in our energetic field, and vice versa. So if we think very depressing thoughts, our pranic atmosphere will be more subdued or repressed. Conversely, there's a pranic quality, and I'm using just sort of pranic quality very generically. That there are more specific structures in which this happens that we can access through practice, and we do. There's that environment of prana, and because they share this immutable relationship, you can draw upon, mold, and sculpt either of them to have a corresponding influence or effect, right? With your mind, you can direct or place prana in specific regions of the body. So, for example, in an asana, when you're, let's say, Paschimottanasana, forward fold, and I'm sure you've heard this instruction, like breathe into where there's tension in the hamstrings. This, and now physically, you don't have lungs in your hamstrings. However, through the powers of your mind, you're able to direct it into that region, the prana, and it has a corresponding effect that we generally regard as positive. Conversely, or the other way, so shaping prana to affect the mind, you can change the manner in which you breathe to have a different psychological effect on the mind. Very, very powerfully and very directly. How you think, so if let's say an old high school friend were to just kind of bust into the door, hello, right, like that, you'd have some corresponding thoughts and associations, as well as your breathing pattern would change as well, right? You wouldn't just be breathing the exact same way as you are now. There would be a response that's reflected in your breath, or any other number of figures that came through. You could think of your worst enemy that comes through the door, and hopefully you don't have too many of those. Or if Mira were to come through the door, there'd be a different quality of breathing that would go along with that. So we can reverse engineer our breath to influence the quality of the state of our awareness. And awareness or consciousness is a cornerstone exploration in the Hatha Yoga, right? What's the origin of awareness, or various states and degrees of insight, and being able to penetrate your view deeper into the folds of creation. Like your mind is this powerful instrument, not only for your immediate visceral life experience, but inward exploration, spiritual growth, and so forth, are powerfully determined, shaped, and explored through the medium of the mind. And and we can apply the principles of prana to the mind to aid that involution. So that in summary, there's a powerful relationship between breath and mind, and we can use either to shape the other in support of our spiritual development.